as they seek to develop new means of sustaining their communities, such as slash and burn agriculture and keeping livestock. Most of these ancient hunter-gatherers suffer appalling poverty resulting from being made landless. Today, most Batwa live in squalid squatter camps on the perimeters of the park. In just one more generation, their forest-based culture, skills, knowledge, traditions, rituals, songs and stories will be gone and lost forever. Their huts are only tolerated on the grounds of others, farmers who misuse these people as slave labour. The relationship between the landowner and the landless pygmies can be seen as that of lords and farm labourers. Of the 150 forest guards in the Gahuzi-Biega National Park, only 20 Batwa are employed as pathfinders. The remainder are unwanted and try to survive one day at a time. All that remains of their previously rich and unique culture is their language and beautiful forms of communication, expressed in song and dance. These performances weld their communities together, where sharing is of great importance and solidarity does still exist. The Batwa are but one example of dozens of indigenous peoples worldwide who have been evicted from their ancestral land for so-called conservation reasons, the majority without any compensation. Another case of this practice can be found in the East African country of Kenya. One of the largest conservation areas is the Tsavo East and West National Park. Since the elephant hunters were pushed out of Tsavo Park when it was created in 1948 as Queen's National Park, the Wata tribe has struggled for both an identity and a livelihood in modern-day Kenya, where hunting elephants is illegal. Even though their traditional lands were expropriated for tourism and conservation, they have received no benefits or compensation. 60 years of economic and political neglect has left them truly marginalized. However, Tsavo National Park had terrible problems with poachers during the 1980s, when the elephant population dropped from 45,000 to just 5,000, and rhinos were almost entirely wiped out. But this was not done by the Wata. Poachers, wealthy Kenyans, and even white people participated in the slaughter of the elephants. The report of the UN Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights and fundamental freedoms of indigenous people in Kenya omits many smaller pastoralist and hunter-gatherer communities who are still not legally recognized as individual tribes. This situation resulted from the colonial policy of promoting assimilation of smaller communities into the dominant society, and is still promoted with all brutality and injustice today. This report details again the ongoing conflict between conservation matters and ancestral land rights inside the Mau forest complex where the Ogiek live. For decades, the Ogiek have fought, first the British colonial powers and then with the Kenyan government, over their right to continue inhabiting the Mau forest. The Kenyan government insists that the area is a forest zone and protected under the Forest Act. Authorities have then ordered the Ogiek to leave the forest, but the Ogiek believe that they have a right to live in what they consider to be their ancestral home, and that the government is trying to illegally and forcefully evict them from the forest.
Ke moche che ke jojuechi ko ke nagista biik iskebakach keteboten keribe emenyon kokichukekichu amun nele serikalit en kerib komokiribe kochukekichu kike kong'ete sururu mpaka nimbo bararket koyekiyenyon kokimach keribe kemoe kityo kesom serikalit ngonakista biik konakta bichon kikimutu koba korenywan kebakachech ak koroninyon kerib timin Mau koyekei tugul kokiyokityo nemoe kemwoin sekretari kelenji okie kongen korib tinye ng'omnotet neo neriben timdo okie ko nekisib koribokis timon keyochi ot kosing'oit amun kingen kerib ot kosing'oit koketon kekichu kobwa beek nemach kinakisa bichu komosing'oitu.
The bizarre situation in the Mau Forest saga is that while the Ogiek face eviction, the Tim Sales Company clear-cuts large forested areas where during colonial times fast-growing non-indigenous tree species were planted in the native forest. Tim Sales belongs mainly to the Kenyatta family, which is highly influential in Kenya. Jomo Kenyatta was Kenya's first president after its independence. Since then, the name is connected with money, property and power. How powerful the family is became clear on the 15th of January 2010. On that day, Prime Minister Raila Odinga planted trees in the Kiptunga area under the motto "Save the Mau." The clear-cutting concessions of Tim Sales were less than 10 kilometres away. There were no logs to be seen along the logging roads, as they usually are on this day. They had been removed as a precaution for the media spectacle. Tim Sales, meanwhile, advertised their timber products during the planting ceremony at an information booth. However, Raila Odinga seems to be the only one in the Kenyan government who understands the true situation of the Ogiek.
The Mau has lost about 197,000 hectares to settlements, farmlands, and chacobanas in the last 15 years. The excisions of the 2001 saw the forest lose more than 61,000 hectares, leading to widespread hue and cry. The cries went unheeded, and today the damage is there for all of us to see.
The Batwa, and maybe soon the Ogiek, are examples of how indigenous peoples close to nature, are being systematically expelled from their ancestral lands. They become refugees of nature conservation efforts, which are often gimmicks or have ulterior motives rewarding mining, water, timber, or other corporate industries. What is left are uprooted, dispossessed and destitute people, falling swiftly into alcoholism and prostitution. Many end up in the city slums as their homeland habitat bleeds and their culture is lost forever, and they become pariahs. They are degraded to the destitute vagabond peasant class, the bottom rung of the consuming society. Robert H. Nelson, professor at the School of Public Affairs of Maryland, says about this issue. In some cases, local populations have been displaced and impoverished in order to create national parks and to serve other conservation objectives. Under the banner of saving the African environment, Africans in the last half-century have been subjected to a new form of environmental colonialism. But there is a glimpse of hope for indigenous peoples. In a landmark decision, an African regional body has found the Kenyan government guilty of violating the rights of the country's indigenous Enderois community by evicting them from their lands to make way for a wildlife reserve. The decision, made by the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, creates a major legal precedent by recognizing, for the first time in Africa, indigenous people's rights concerning traditionally owned land and their right to determine their own development path. The eviction of the Enderois people by the Kenyan government and the annexing of the land began with the public declaration of state ownership of the land, to create the Lake Bogoria National Reserve in 1973 and continued until 1986. During this time, the community has consistently suffered violence and threats. The complaint was lodged with the African Commission in 2003, claiming that the Kenyan government had violated the African Charter by failing to recognize and protect the ancestral land rights of the Indirois. Enlightened conservationists are beginning to accept the axiom that only by preserving cultural diversity can biological diversity be protected, and vice versa.